Purpose. The purpose of the project cost estimation procedure is to outline the process for developing cost estimates for project bidding and establishing a budget baseline for project management. Scope. This standard operating procedure defines the steps, responsibilities, internal controls, and authorizations for preparing, reviewing, and approving cost estimates for all project services offered by ARENA in the UAE, KSA, and Asia divisions. Applicability. The procedures defined in this document apply to the estimation team and all ARENA employees, including contract personnel and part-time staff, involved in estimating costs for bidding on project services in the UAE, KSA, and Asia divisions. Glossary of terms. Bill of Quantities, or BOQ. A detailed document prepared by a quantity surveyor listing and describing all materials, quantities, and associated costs required for a construction project. Contingency budget. A reserve fund allocated by a quantity surveyor to cover unforeseen events or risks that may impact the costs of a construction project. Cost control. The management process of monitoring and regulating the costs of a construction project to ensure it remains within the budget. Cost database. A repository of historical cost information maintained by quantity surveyors, used for reference and benchmarking during estimation and cost control processes. Cost estimation. The process of determining the anticipated costs of a construction project by considering factors such as materials, labor, equipment, and overhead expenses. Earned value analysis. A technique used by quantity surveyors to assess the progress and performance of a construction project by comparing the budgeted cost of work performed to the actual cost. Material takeoff. The process of quantifying and listing the quantities of specific materials required for a construction project, typically based on the Bill of Quantities, or BOQ. Quantity takeoff. The process of quantifying and measuring the quantities of materials required for a construction project based on drawings and specifications. Tender documentation. A set of documents prepared by a quantity surveyor to invite bids from contractors, including drawings, specifications, bills of quantities, and contractual terms. Value engineering. A systematic approach to analyze and optimize the value of a project by balancing the cost, function, quality, and aesthetics of its components. Variation order. A formal document issued by the quantity surveyor to authorize changes to the scope, design, or specifications of a construction project, which may affect costs. Procedure. The project cost estimation procedure covers 8 key activities. Each of these activities is described in detail on the following pages. Capture and review estimation requirements, structure and quantify scope, collect and review data, develop direct costs, develop other costs, develop professional services cost, apply markups, report, review, and issue estimate. Capture and review estimation requirements. The Costing and Estimation Manager is responsible for assigning a quantity surveyor, or QS, to prepare the Bill of Quantities, or BOQ, for a project when the service is requested by the commercial team. Account managers may prepare project budgets for client submission. However, all costing jobs must be reviewed by the Costing and Estimation Manager. Once an estimate is requested, the QS captures and reviews all available project information needed to develop the bid estimate. Inputs can include the project brief, RFP or RFQ, engineering drawings and specifications, project schedule, and pricing resources. Prior to starting any pricing activities, the quantity surveyor, or QS, coordinates with the account manager, or AM, to obtain all necessary clarifications related to the project and confirms. Purpose of the estimate: general project description, including deadlines for submission, required estimation approach, including accuracy ranges, plan engineering deliverables, planned quantity and pricing basis, including historical costs and supplier quotations. Structure and quantify estimation scope. For general bidding or tendering purposes, an estimation breakdown structure, or EBS template, is defined in ARENA's estimation solution, Candy. The Cost and Estimation Manager is responsible for ensuring that the EBS template in Candy is updated and relevant. The quantity surveyor, or QS, may consult the account manager if a different template is required. The project's work breakdown structure, or WBS, scope statement, historical information, Resource information and policies serve as inputs to determine the resources needed for the project. The main output is a list of resource requirements that provides the basis for developing the estimates. Collect and review estimation data. The quantity surveyor, or QS, should clearly identify the source of pricing data for various resource components. Pricing data sources may include supplier or vendor quotations, historical pricing information, pre-approved rate cards, or expert judgment. The procurement manager is a key resource for obtaining supplier or vendor information and should be involved in all supplier requests and communications. Quotations may require conditioning, and the QS should apply any necessary design development allowances to account for future price growth typically incurred during the design and submittal process. The QS may seek guidance from the cost and estimation manager in cases where the scope of work is not fully clear, and item-based contingency may need to be applied. Previous quotations, purchase orders, subcontracts, change order estimates, and similar documents may be referenced for historical pricing information. The cost and estimation manager is responsible for preparing and sharing pre-approved rate cards with the quantity surveyor or QS team for pricing information on internal rental items. These rates must be reviewed every 3 months. Team or individual judgment data can be used when the maturity of the scope is not fully developed, or when it is challenging to compare the work to historical or published data. Develop estimates of direct costs. The quantity surveyor, or QS, is responsible for identifying and developing the direct costs for the estimate. Direct costs are typically defined as the costs associated with the installation of the structure, including direct labor, trade-dedicated construction equipment, direct equipment and materials, and direct subcontracts. If required, the estimation breakdown structure, or EBS, should clearly define the direct costs included in the estimate. General guidelines for the various direct cost categories are provided below. For calculating labor rates specific to the region and scope of work should be developed and available through Candy. Rate cards may be used. These cards, prepared by the cost and estimation manager, could include daily rates for external and in-house crew, based on their skill levels. Historical or published labor rates may be used as a reference or check. For unit installation productivities, installation units, calculated as labor hours per unit, should be applied to the estimated quantities for a given activity. For detailed estimates, these installation units are typically derived from published sources or in-house databases and are traditionally based on ideal construction conditions, III. When using these standard rates, the quantity surveyor, or QS, must apply productivity adjustments to account for conditions that may either enhance or inhibit installation work compared to standard units. For construction plant and equipment production rates and pricing, duration can be determined based on usage rates and standby time to apply appropriate rental rates, calculated as cost per duration. The quantity surveyor, or QS, must also consider mobilization and demobilization, as well as operator and operating costs, such as fuel and maintenance. Equipment-related input should be obtained from the operations team. For arenas rental inventories, pricing can be based on published rate cards for rental inventories. For all pricing, the QS must verify whether the price is inclusive of freight, transport, packaging, protection, taxes, and duties, or if these costs are accounted for separately. The logistics executive should be consulted for customs and duties costs if this information is not available. In such cases, these rates must be reviewed with the executive. For subcontracted scope, the scope that will be subcontracted should be clearly identified, and the quantity surveyor, or QS, should determine the basis for pricing. Subcontractor pricing should be solicited, or historical pricing for this scope should be used whenever possible. For scope typically performed by specialty subcontractors, such as painting and insulation, published or in-house rates may be used. However, appropriate adjustments must be applied to account for location and market conditions. Develop estimates of other costs. The quantity surveyor, or QS, is responsible for identifying and developing indirect costs and other costs for the estimate. Indirect costs in an estimate typically include construction management and supervision, indirect field labor, temporary provisions, and indirect construction equipment, such as shared equipment. Other costs include logistics and freight, material taxes, and any other project-specific costs. If required, the Estimation Breakdown Structure, or EBS, should clearly define the indirect and other costs included in the estimate. For construction management and supervision, the Quantity Surveyor, or QS, should determine the required construction management, or CM, and supervision staffing based on the project execution plan, contracting model, and scope of work. Consult with the head of projects to determine whether the project manager will be an internal or external resource. Consult with the interiors manager and structures manager to determine whether the crew will be an internal or external resource. The QS will price the CM and supervision based on the project duration and work schedule, applying actual or contractual rates when available. Travel expenses, including flights, local transportation, lodging, and subsistence costs for the project location, must also be accounted for. For mobility expenses, such as travel, visa, and accommodation for senior management, the Quantity Surveyor, or QS, may consult the account manager or refer to historical rates. Freelancer salaries must be considered. Calculate per diems for claims outside the Home Office. Standard rates are defined for these claims. For site welfare costs, the QS will evaluate the need for indirect materials and subcontracts that support construction operations on the project. These rates should be determined based on the site personnel and the number of project days. These costs typically include temporary facilities or offices, supplies, dumpsters, tool and material storage, temporary power and utilities, and personal protective equipment. Additional site welfare costs include freshwater supply, sewage removal, office cleaning, and refreshments. If required, contractor housing and subsistence, as well as contractor mobilization and demobilization, can be included in this section. A combination of historical rental rates, published pricing, and supplier or subcontractor quotes can be used to calculate these costs. Non-PO costs. The Quantity Surveyor, or QS, may consult the head of projects to determine non-purchase order costs. These costs may include petty cash expenses, such as expenses for passes, overtime worker meals, site mobilization charges, power tools and consumables, HSE-related approvals, when exceptional, and fuel expenses for outstation transportation, such as rental cars. Additional non-PO costs may include expenses related to insurances, bank guarantees, and withholding tax. Project-specific costs. The QS works with the account manager to determine if any additional project-specific costs are required. Examples include specialty insurances, bonding requirements, and net asset charges. These costs will be clearly stated in the basis of estimate as either included or excluded, with the applicable basis specified. The Quantity Surveyor, or QS, works with the asset manager to determine any asset customization charges based on project requirements. The commercial team may be consulted to identify costs related to venue services. In these cases, the sales admin contacts the venue to obtain the price list and coordinates with the operations team to determine the required services. The sales admin then consolidates the list of selected services and shares it with the QS. For civil-related scope work, subcontractor quotations or historical data may be referenced. For any project-specific CAPEX, the QS consults the asset manager. This cost will not be included in the bill of quantities, or BOQ, but will be recorded for reporting purposes. Develop professional services cost. Professional services costs typically include design and engineering, project management, and home office support. Whether these services will be performed by ARENA or a subcontractor, the Quantity Surveyor, or QS, must determine if professional services will be included in the project costs. For design-related costs, the QS consults the design director or design manager. This may include the designer's travel, accommodation, and visa expenses. For expenses related to engineering calculations, such as surveys, inspections, and sign-offs, the engineering team may be consulted for internal rates. If this scope is outsourced, rates may be obtained from external suppliers. Apply markups. The primary markups required for the estimates include escalation, contingency, overhead and profit, and taxes. These may vary depending on the project scope. For escalations, the Quantity Surveyor, or QS, collaborates with the procurement manager to include escalations in the estimate to account for potential price increases in equipment, materials, labor, and other costs due to ongoing price changes over time. The source of escalation information should be identified, and the applicability of the rates should be explained and justified. The QS confirms these details with the cost and estimation manager. For contingency, the quantity surveyor, or QS, will collaborate with the account manager and other key project stakeholders to determine the method for calculating the contingency applied to the estimate. Contingency is defined as an amount added to an estimate to account for items, conditions, or events where the state, occurrence, or effect is uncertain at the time of the estimate, but is likely, based on experience, to result in additional costs in aggregate. Contingency does not cover major scope changes and is not hidden profit, rather, it is an anticipated cost. Contingency does not affect the overall accuracy of the estimate, but instead changes the probability of the project overrunning the estimated costs. For gross profit, the gross profit to be applied to the estimate is specified by the account manager. For condition for including taxes, the standard practice is to exclude all taxes in the costing. The account manager, or AM, should advise if tax should be included and provide details of the applicable tax, including the amount. Report, review, and issue estimate. Once the final design proposal is available from the design team, the quantity surveyor, or QS, will review it against the finalized design and confirm details with the operations team. The QS must ensure that the operations team reviews and approves the labor, plant and machinery, transportation, and project management components in the Bill of Quantities, or BOQ. Reporting templates must be standardized and available in the ERP system. The template should include revenue, cost, gross margin, CAPX if required, and free cash flow. Standard payment terms must be applied if no specific information is provided. General exclusions, notes, and qualifications should be included in all proposals, along with ARENA's terms and conditions. The cost and estimation manager reviews all estimates before they are issued to the account manager, or AM, and top management. The quantity surveyor, or QS, documents and submits the estimate for a comprehensive review by all key stakeholders to ensure accuracy and completeness. At a minimum, each bid estimate shall be reviewed with the account management and operations teams. Any comments for revision are documented by the QS, and the estimates are updated accordingly. After all required approvals are given, the QS prepares the final documents for issuance to the AM. RACI Matrix. A RACI matrix is a tool that clarifies roles and responsibilities in a project by designating who is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed for each task. Please take some time to study this matrix for a clear understanding of team roles. Please review this RACI matrix carefully.